The Jedi Council looked at Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One, the most powerful Force user in recorded Jedi history, and told him to take a seat. Then they looked at what the internet has collectively agreed to call an Eevee with a lightsaber, and said, "Welcome, Master." There was also a Hutt in this file, a sentient tree, a species literally born attuned to the dark side, and one species whose distributed biology makes Force sensitivity so theoretically improbable that the Jedi Order's own record on the subject has no clean answer, a mystery teased now and returned to at the end, because its resolution, or rather its absence, is the most damning thing in the entire record. The bunny cat comes first. To understand why any of this matters, you need to understand what the Jedi High Council was actually supposed to be, not in the abstract, specifically. Thousands of years of institutional history, a philosophical code refined by some of the most rigorous minds the galaxy produced, a body composed entirely of sitting masters, beings who had already been judged worthy of the highest rank the Order conferred. They had midichlorian data, psychological profiles, decades of field performance records, and the accumulated weight of a tradition that predated the Republic itself. When the High Council made a decision, all of that was supposed to be behind it. The problem this record establishes is that this weight, this centuries-deep institutional authority, was being applied in ways that produced outcomes ranging from the defensible to the genuinely baffling. The incoherence wasn't occasional. It was structural, built into the decision-making apparatus itself, visible only in aggregate when you pull every file and lay the cases side by side. The denial of Anakin Skywalker's master rank in 19 BBY was the moment the incoherence became impossible to ignore, because it happened in front of witnesses, in real time, to the most Force-sensitive person the Order had ever encountered. So, the scene. The Jedi Council chamber sits at the top of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. Circular room, high-backed chairs, panoramic transparisteel views of a planet city bleeding light below. Every seat occupied by someone who earned it through demonstrated mastery. Anakin Skywalker walks in as the newest member of that ring, placed there not by the Council's own selection process, but by Chancellor Palpatine, who had named him his personal representative to the body. That alone was constitutionally unprecedented. A sitting chancellor directly installing a member into what had always been a self-selecting, autonomous institution. The Council accepted it, and their reason says everything about where this story was already heading. Palpatine had been moving in ways they could sense but not clearly identify, and Anakin's proximity to the Chancellor made him the Order's best intelligence asset. They cooperated with the appointment specifically so he could monitor Palpatine from the inside, a political calculation dressed in the language of necessity, made without telling Anakin that was what he was for. Mace Windu delivered the second half of the ruling in the same breath. The Council seat was confirmed. The rank of Jedi Master would be withheld. In the entire recorded history of the Order, no being had ever sat on the High Council without simultaneously holding that rank. Seat and rank were functionally inseparable. One implied the other the way a judicial appointment implies having been admitted to the bar. The Council invented a new category on the spot, member without rank, created and applied exclusively to Anakin Skywalker. Anakin's response, delivered with the controlled fury of a man who had spent years suppressing exactly that kind of fury, was that the decision was outrageous and unfair. He was accurately describing what happened. The Council offered no rebuttal that held up under scrutiny, because the actual reasons, political calculation, institutional fear of his power, distrust of his emotional life, were things they couldn't say in that room. The reasons they did offer centered on emotional volatility, attachments, anger, fear. The Council had been noting these traits since the day Qui-Gon Jinn carried a 9-year-old slave boy from Tatooine into that chamber and said, "This child will bring balance to the Force." They watched him for 13 years. They trained him, deployed him, promoted him to Jedi Knight, assigned him a Padawan of his own. At every stage, they had sufficient information to either address what troubled them or accept that their concerns were outweighed by his demonstrated capability. They chose neither. They promoted him enough to keep him inside the institution, while withholding the recognition that would have made him feel genuinely part of it. By the time they denied him the rank in 19 BBY, Palpatine had been constructing an alternative offer for years, one built entirely on the unconditional belonging the Council kept refusing to provide. The Council told a man they feared his emotions. Then they elevated to the Order's highest rank a creature whose primary physiological feature is that its emotions are visible on its body. His name was Ikrit, a male Kushiban from the world of Kushiba, trained as a Jedi by Yoda himself, and confirmed in Legends lore as a Jedi Master. The Kushiban are small, rabbit-like beings, covered in white fur that shifts color in response to emotional state, which means that when Ikrit was startled, or grieving, or curious, you could read it off his coat the way you'd read a mood ring. His ears were proportionally large. His overall build put him somewhere between a stuffed animal and a small woodland creature that had achieved enlightenment. The internet's consensus, that he resembles what would happen if an Eevee and Dobby had a Force-sensitive child, is less mockery than its accurate physical description. Yoda trained this being. The same Yoda who voted to deny Anakin Skywalker the rank of Master had, at some earlier point in his 900-year career, looked at a small rabbit creature with an emotionally transparent pelt and decided this one was going all the way. Ikrit went all the way. His species isn't described in any surviving Legends material as uniquely powerful or biologically predisposed toward Force sensitivity in ways that make his elevation feel predetermined. He trained under the Grand Master and earned the rank that the Chosen One was refused. The Council told Anakin his inner life was disqualifying. They told a being whose inner life was literally displayed in real time on its fur. Master. Beldorian the Hutt held the rank of Jedi Knight, that specific rank, confirmed in primary lore, distinct from Master, and the distinction is worth keeping precise. Jedi Knight is still a remarkable designation for a member of the species that produced Jabba de Siligecturi, crime lord, slaveholder, the galaxy's most documented patron of organized crime and casual murder. Beldorian was a Force-sensitive Hutt accepted into the Jedi Order and serving as a knight under the Galactic Republic roughly 400 years before the events of the films. He later fell to the dark side and became a despotic ruler of the planet Nam Chorios, which is covered in the novel Planet of Twilight. His Jedi years, the 4 centuries of Republic service before that, are the part that belongs in this file. A claim circulates in fan communities that Beldorian possessed a midichlorian count higher than Yoda's, possibly higher than Anakin's. Planet of Twilight does not provide midichlorian counts for any character. That comparison is fan speculation that accumulated credibility through repetition, and treating it as established lore would be the kind of error this record is specifically built to avoid. So it goes. What can be stated without qualification is that the Jedi Order accepted a Hutt, trained him in the ways of the Force, and handed him a lightsaber. The council that told Anakin his attachment to his wife was a disqualifying emotional liability had 4 centuries earlier looked at a member of the most hedonistic, excess-celebrating, self-indulgent species in the known galaxy and determined their cultural baseline presented no comparable concern. Beldorian didn't make Master. Anakin didn't make Master. These two facts sit at wildly different points on the scale of injustice, and yet they share the same institutional logic, or rather, the same institutional absence of it. Asherad Het was biologically human. This requires emphasis, because another creator in this space described him as a Tusken Raider and received 6 separate corrections from the lore-literate audience in real time. He was a human being raised by Tusken Raiders, a cultural distinction that carries enormous weight, and collapsing the two is exactly the kind of sloppy shorthand that signals lazy research to an audience actively paying attention. His father, Asherad Het, had been a celebrated Jedi Knight who walked away from the Order and integrated fully into Tusken culture on Tatooine. Married into the tribe, raised his son under the desert traditions, made a life among people the rest of the Republic had largely written off as a nuisance on a forgettable Outer Rim rock. Asherad grew up masked, carrying dual identities he never entirely resolved into a single coherent self. He was eventually brought into the Jedi Order, and carried all of that desert heritage with him. The warrior disciplines and the Jedi disciplines running parallel inside him. Two different frameworks for surviving a universe that kept trying to kill him. He trained, he advanced. He reached the rank of Jedi Master and served as a general during the Clone Wars, fighting in the same conflict as Anakin Skywalker, inside the same institution that was already building toward institutional collapse, without anyone fully seeing it from the inside. When Order 66 executed, and the clone troopers turned on their commanders across the galaxy, Het survived. He returned to Tatooine, the only ground that had claimed him before the Order did, and rebuilt something of himself in the desert. He kept surviving through the Imperial era, the Galactic Civil War, the rise of the New Republic, each successive phase of galactic history a different expression of the same endurance test. Then the Yuuzhan Vong invaded. That species existed entirely outside the Force. The Force seemed to go dark in their presence the way a signal drops in a dead zone. And when Het fought in that war, the Vong captured him. They subjected him to the embrace of pain. His arm was taken. Something was implanted in his mind during that captivity that the dark side found and used, moving into the available space the way water finds fractures in stone. He disappeared. When he came back into galactic history, he had built an entirely new theological architecture. He was Darth Krayt. He had constructed the One Sith, not the rule of two, but something far more patient and far more dangerous. An entire order operating in secret across generations. And roughly 130 years after Return of the Jedi, he used it to take everything. He toppled the Galactic Alliance. He installed himself as Sith Emperor. He ruled from a throne built on a century of accumulated damage, and the line running from the Jedi Council's institutional failures to that throne isn't hard to draw. The emotional infrastructure that might have held a person together through what Het survived, the belonging, the recognition, the institutional commitment to members as people rather than as capability assets. The Jedi Order had been failing to build that infrastructure for the entirety of its existence. Anakin's version of the same failure happened fast. Palpatine moved in days. Het's version took 100 years of accumulated pressure to complete. A century of surviving things no support structure was ever designed to help him survive. Until there was nothing left of the Jedi in him except combat training, repurposed toward a different end. Same underlying fracture, different timelines. Both starting from inside that council chamber. The Neti are a species of shape-shifting, sentient plants who generally stood between 2 and 5 meters tall. They photosynthesize. They have roots. They can deliberately alter their physical mass and form, which makes them unusual in combat and extraordinary in the kind of extended meditative states that most species can't sustain for more than a few hours. Udar is the most documented Neti Jedi in Legends continuity, appearing in the Tales of the Jedi comics, and his biography is exactly as remarkable as you'd expect from a being whose species experiences time at a fundamentally different cadence than mammals do. He was ancient when the Sith Wars were young. He survived multiple galactic-scale catastrophes by doing the most Neti thing possible. He planted himself, in the literal sense, took root in soil, and entered a dormant state that let him wait out centuries the way a tree waits out winter. When the threat passed, he surfaced and returned to active Jedi service. One clarification the record requires. Udar predates Luke Skywalker by thousands of years, so the framing, Luke trained a tree Jedi, is imprecise. The Neti tradition of Jedi membership is far older than the Skywalker era. What the record shows without qualification is that the Jedi Order trained and elevated members of a species that performs gas exchange through stomata, that would, between active assignments, require sufficient sunlight and adequate soil composition to maintain peak function, that could survive a bad century by standing still and becoming part of the landscape until conditions improved. The Council looked at all of this and said, Jedi. Anakin Skywalker received a seat without a rank attached to it. The sentient tree received the Order's full institutional welcome. Everything up to this point has been absurdist, in the way that makes an institution look foolish. This next entry is different. It's less funny and more genuinely troubling, because it doesn't just expose inconsistency. It exposes a contradiction so fundamental, the institution apparently never worked out how to address it. In the Old Republic era, Jedi Order records preserved through Star Wars: The Old Republic and associated Legends lore document members of the Sith species training with the Jedi. The actual Sith species, the red-skinned, tendrilled humanoids whose biology is described across Old Republic material as carrying a native attunement to the dark side. Beings whose physiological relationship to the Force runs inherently darker than virtually any other sentient species in the known galaxy, by the lore's own framing. The Council's position, apparently, was that this was manageable, that dark side attunement at the biological level was a condition the Order could work with. Specific verified names for individual Sith species members of the High Council from this period aren't in the available sources, so the prosecution doesn't fabricate a roster. What is confirmed is that the phenomenon existed in Legends continuity, that Sith species individuals with Force sensitivity trained alongside Jedi and were accepted into the tradition. The philosophical weight of that fact doesn't require names. The Council informed Anakin Skywalker that his emotional attachments, love for a specific person, fear of losing her, the interior life of someone who had been human his entire existence, constituted a risk too serious to be trusted with the rank of Master. That same institution had previously determined that a species with a documented biological lean toward the dark side presented a risk it was prepared to absorb. A coherent principle that produces both of those decisions simultaneously doesn't appear to exist. The Council never had to articulate one, because they were the ones holding the ranks, and Anakin was the one living with the result. Two entries that apparently didn't make it into other coverage on this subject are worth placing on the record here. Tar Vizsla was a Mandalorian who was accepted into the Jedi Order, trained in its traditions, and while a member of that order, created the Darksaber, a unique, black-bladed lightsaber that became the symbol of Mandalorian leadership for generations after him. This is Disney canon, established and confirmed across official Lucasfilm material and referenced in The Mandalorian. Tar Vizsla came from a warrior culture that had fought the Jedi Order in multiple conflicts across centuries of intermittent, occasionally catastrophic hostility. The Mandalorian Wars aren't a minor footnote in galactic history. The institutional relationship between Jedi and Mandalorian culture was adversarial for most of the Republic's existence. The Council accepted one of them anyway, trained him fully, and he built them a weapon so singular it became a crown passed between rulers. Anakin Skywalker built the Order, 18 years of dedicated service, trained a Padawan of his own, and compiled a battlefield record that made him the public face of the Republic's war effort. He didn't make Master. Lobaka is Chewbacca's nephew, a Wookiee who was trained directly by Luke Skywalker at the Jedi Praxium on Yavin 4, documented in the Young Jedi Knights novel series in Legends continuity. He achieved the rank of Jedi Knight, a Wookiee who communicates in a language requiring a dedicated translation droid, who operated a lightsaber in combat conditions that would challenge beings with considerably more refined fine motor control, achieved formal Jedi rank under Luke Skywalker's direct instruction. This is post-Empire lore, after the Council's original structure had been rebuilt rather than inherited, so the institutional comparison isn't perfectly parallel. What it adds to the record is cumulative weight. A Kushiban, a Hutt, a sentient tree, a human raised in the Tatooine desert, a member of the Sith species, a Mandalorian, Chewbacca's nephew. The Force reached across every conceivable biological category, every cultural background, every physiological improbability. The man with the highest midichlorian count in recorded Jedi history sat in a chair without a title to go with it. And then there's the Ewok. Nubs appears in Young Jedi Adventures, the Disney Plus canon series, as a Force-sensitive Ewok training with the Jedi. An Ewok, the species most famous for nearly cooking Han Solo in honor of the golden god they just met. A member of that species is in the active Jedi training pipeline in official current canon. The Council is gone by the time Nubs appears in the timeline, so this one can't be laid directly at its feet. but it belongs in the file because it illustrates how wide the Force's reach actually is, and how narrow the Council's stated concerns about Anakin's suitability always looked when placed against the full breadth of the tradition they were supposedly protecting. The Gendai. The opening of this video mentioned a species whose biology makes Force sensitivity so theoretically improbable that the Order's own record on the subject has no clear answer. Here's what the lore establishes. The Gendai are near-immortal beings with a distributed nervous system. Their consciousness spread across their biology like a network, resilient against damage that would destroy any other being because there is no single point of failure to target. Dirge, the most prominent Gendai in Legends lore, fought through centuries of conflict, including the Clone Wars, and absorbed catastrophic damage that would have ended anything with more conventional biology. The Gendai are, by almost every biological standard, extraordinary. They are also, by almost every theoretical framework the Jedi Order applied when evaluating Force sensitivity, a species that shouldn't work the way it does. Whether any Gendai Jedi exist in Legends or canon material isn't confirmed in the available record. Force sensitivity in Gendai is simply not explicitly addressed in surviving lore. That absence is exactly the point. The Council maintained records of Force sensitivity across thousands of species. They accepted Hutts and Kushibans and shape-shifting plants, and members of the species literally named after the dark side. They apparently never produced a clear institutional answer about the Gendai, a species with a distributed nervous system, no central brain, and near-immortal regeneration, and whether the Force could or couldn't flow through something built that way. The mystery isn't resolved. The Council just moved on, the way institutions do when the question is inconvenient. Anakin Skywalker wasn't denied the rank of Jedi Master because the Council held the bar high. He was denied it because the bar had no fixed position. It moved depending on who was being evaluated and what the institution needed in that moment. Ikrit made Master through a body that broadcast his feelings in real time. Beldorian served as a knight, representing a species built on excess and indulgence. A biologically human man, raised in the Tatooine desert, outlived the entire Jedi Order, survived a century of compounding catastrophe, and became a Sith Emperor because the institution that trained him couldn't build what it would have taken to hold him together. A sentient tree stood in the Force tradition for thousands of years. A Mandalorian built the Order's most distinctive weapon while being a member of a culture the Order had fought for centuries. The Sith species itself walked through the door. And somewhere in the lore, the Gendai sit as the question the Council apparently never finished asking. A species that probably shouldn't be Force-sensitive, documented nowhere in the record as having been addressed, filed away alongside every other institutional loose end. Anakin walked out of that chamber carrying a seat without a rank, and Palpatine was already waiting with an offer the Council had spent 13 years making inevitable. His anger wasn't irrational. It was the precise and proportionate response of someone who had read the institution's record clearly enough to know he was being held to a standard the institution itself had never consistently applied. Whatever the anger led him to do, and the consequences aren't the point of this record, though they are hard to separate from it, the anger itself made a kind of terrible, logical sense. The Jedi Council built toward it, one incoherent decision at a time, and the Bunny Cat Jedi Master is just the most efficient image for seeing the whole thing at once. Subscribe if you want more of this. The lore goes considerably deeper than most people expect.